Hello, everyone. It's Daz, and this week's discussion is sort of a continuation of a couple of weeks ago about the possibility of a famine in the United States, except it seems that much of the world is impacted by the entire COVID situation. Now, there are a lot of videos I've seen of people exposing the food industry and the agriculture industry, and I'm going to touch on a couple of stories that have come up as of lately. A bunch of chickens were ordered to be killed in Delaware, according to Business Insider. Billions of chickens were euthanized. A poultry processing plant in Delaware has made the difficult but necessary decision to kill 2 million chickens as worker shortages push the U.S. meat supply chain toward a breaking point. Delmarva Poultry Industry, Inc., a cooperative that works with about 1,300 farmers, said it looked at all the other options, including allowing other chicken companies to transport and process the chickens and taking a partially processed product to rendering facilities to utilize for other animal feed, but ultimately declined on euthanasia. If no action were taken, the birds would outgrow the capacity of the chicken house to hold them, the company said, adding that the birds would be killed using approved humane methods and farmers would still be compensated. It's crazy how we have so much food in the United States, yet here we are killing chickens. They're not being allowed to live, which I think is animal cruelty, but this is America for you. There's also the issue that a lot of plants are shutting down. The plants like Smithfield and Tyson are also having difficulties with meat storage, even if there is enough product to store away. There's plenty of food in the U.S., with hundreds of millions of pounds of meat in cold storage. The challenge is the lack of processing options, with facilities like Smithfield closing, which results in less product variety. We have a lot of pork, we have a lot of chicken, and we have a lot of beef in cold storage, said Steve Meyer, a Kearns associate economist. We can draw on that should we have shortages. There's also the issue of thousands of gallons of milk being dumped, smashed eggs, plowed vegetables that are being left to rot. In 2018, over half of the U.S.'s spending on food was on the commercial side of the supply chain. The introduction of social distancing measures in March forced schools, corporate cafeterias, and many restaurants to close. As a result, a lot of food intended for commercial uses no longer had a buyer. To understand why this food can't readily be diverted to consumers, let's take a closer look at the supply chains for meat, vegetables, and milk. With each category, there are different reasons. Vegetable farmers, for example, have a lot of crops growing in their fields, intended for commercial buyers like schools, restaurants, and cruise lines, which are no longer purchasing these products. But a worsening labor shortage makes it a lot harder to harvest or pick their crops and package them for consumers. So a combination of plunging commercial demand, not enough low-wage yet skilled workers, failing prices, and a short window in which to pick vegetables means it has become cheaper to simply let them rot in the fields. As for meat, restaurants typically order larger cuts and use more of the pricier parts like tenderloins. In contrast, much of the meat purchased on the consumer side is sold in case-ready packages, and ground beef is far more common. So in general, commercial buyers tend to buy parts of the cow or pig that consumers simply don't prepare at home. But what's more, meat plant closures due to COVID-19 outbreaks are creating a bottleneck for slaughtering and processing animals, which also have a short window before they are past their prime. As a result, producers, particularly pork farmers, are debating whether to feed and care for their animals past their prime or simply euthanize them. Milk is even more complicated when it comes to how it flows along the food chain. First, there's no stopping cows giving milk. Udders that are full must be emptied daily. The only question is where that milk will go. Restaurants and organizations like schools purchase nearly half of all cow milk, butter, and other dairy products processed in the U.S. Pizzerias alone take nearly a quarter of all U.S. cheese production. With many of these customers closed or cutting their purchases, there's a lot of excess milk. Unfortunately, processors do not have the equipment to package the milk into smaller containers for grocery store and retail use. As for converting more milk into dairy products with longer shelf lives like cheese, there's already a glut of mozzarella and other cheese plugging up cold storage spaces. And despite a rise of takeout pizza, overall demand for cheese has dropped like a rock, according to trade industry sources. That has left dairy farmers with little choice but to dump excess milk into manure ponds and ditches. It's just really alarming when we think about how there is that separation of farmers having to provide products to schools and corporations and restaurants, and then they also provide food to grocery stores, but because there is a slowdown in business, they're choosing to just euthanize animals and dump milk and waste crops. There's also potato farmers who are choosing to give the shortage of potatoes to restaurants for fries and tater tots and other things. There's also shortages of rice, grain, and beans. Staple foods like rice, grain, and beans that are typically imported to the U.S. are suddenly in short supply or costing consumers more as other countries limit their exports. Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan are restricting grain exports. Cambodia and India are limiting rice exports, and Egypt has ceased legume exports for 3 months, according to Reuters. With consumers now preparing and eating all of their food at home, demand for grocery store goods has skyrocketed. Major grocery chain Kroger said sales grew 30% over a month in March. Because of this food shortage and a lot of people that are now unemployed, there's also a higher demand for food banks and pantries. Food banks, which have seen a sudden 40% increase in demand due to the rising number of unemployed Americans, typically rely on supermarket donations to feed the communities. Because supermarkets are now being emptied by consumers, the food banks are seeing a serious shortage of inventory. With all this being said, it was announced by President Donald Trump yesterday that he is going to sign a DPA order to keep meat plants open. President Trump plans to sign an executive order invoking the Defense Production Act to compel meat processing plants to remain open during the coronavirus pandemic, Bloomberg first reported Tuesday. The order would classify meat processing plants as essential infrastructure, with federal government officials providing protective gear and guidance to workers. Government officials have reportedly estimated that up to 80% of the country's meat supply could be shut down during the pandemic. I wanted to share all of this information with you. Many of you may already be aware, but I'd like to know what your thoughts are on the fact that animals are being euthanized, crops are going to waste, and there's a shortage of the essentials like rice and beans. I know many of you guys have stocked up or have prepared for this, but think about extended family, friends who may not have a month or 3 month supply to live off of. And this is definitely an alarming situation, and while the president has tried to keep these plants open, if there's a shortage of workers, it's going to be tough. We are in some interesting times, and I would definitely encourage those of you with faith to pray and just keep your ears to the ground. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are on everything happening. I'll be sure on the next live stream on Monday to look at comments, address any concerns, questions anyone has. Thank you again for listening. As always, take care and God bless.